This sick little girl was on a flight when she saw a very sad man walking towards the airplane door while it was flying, unaware of what he was about to do. She talks to him, but he pulls her arm, and something unexpected happens. Comment what you think will happen, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The plane was cutting through the night, amidst light turbulence. In the first-class aisle, Oliver Lancaster staggered, his heavy steps echoing on the navy blue. Our carpet. His Italian suit, normally impeccable, was rumpled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. Red, swollen eyes betrayed hours of stifled crying. In his trembling hands, he held a manila envelope. Inside was the will he had just received. His grandmother had passed away that morning, leaving him an even larger fortune than he already possessed. The paper seemed to burn his fingers, as if every penny inherited was a silent accusation of his loneliness. Grandma Betty had been the only person who truly loved him. Now, at 42 years old, Oliver found himself completely alone in the world. What good was owning one of the largest companies in the country if he had no one to share it with? The money, which he had so craved throughout his life, now seemed like a cruel joke of fate. He stumbled towards the emergency exit, his fingers grazing the metallic lever. For a moment, he considered opening it. What difference would it make? No one would miss him anyway. He was about to pull the latch when a soft voice interrupted him. "Mister, why are you crying?" Oliver turned, startled. There, sitting in a seat near the exit, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her big brown eyes watched him with a serene curiosity that disconcerted him. It was then that he noticed the detail that made his heart clench. On her thin arm, an IV drip betrayed a serious medical condition. "I'm not crying," he lied, quickly running his hands over his face to dry the tears he hadn't even realized were still falling. "Yes, you are," she insisted with the typical honesty of children. "And you seem very sad. My mom says that when we're sad, it's good to talk." Oliver looked around, searching for the girl's parents, but saw no one, only a flight attendant dozing a few rows ahead. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to stall for time while he decided what to do. "Lily," she replied, offering a faint smile that lit up her pale face. "And you?" "Oliver," he responded automatically, surprised to find himself actually talking to her. "Why are you so sad, Oliver?" There was something in the way she said his name with such simplicity and genuine interest that made the words simply flow from his mouth. "My grandmother died today," he said, his voice cracking. She was everything I had." "I'm sorry," said Lily, and there was an understanding in her voice that went beyond her age. "It must hurt a lot. When I'm in pain, my mom always hugs me. Do you want a hug?" Before he could answer, the girl had already gotten up, dragging her IV stand with her. Her thin arms wrapped him in an awkward but warm embrace. It was as if something inside him broke. The tears returned in full force, and he found himself sobbing in the arms of this child he barely knew. "It's okay," she whispered, patting him awkwardly on the back. "Sometimes we just need to cry." For several minutes they remained like that, until Oliver's sobs began to subside. When he finally pulled away, embarrassed, he noticed that Lily looked even paler than before. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. "Just a little dizzy," she replied, returning to her seat with unsteady steps. "It's normal. It always happens." "Where's your mum?" "She went to the restroom. She always takes a while because she takes the chance to cry in secret. She thinks I don't know, but I do." The simplicity with which Lily spoke of something so painful caught him off guard. Before he could respond, a woman appeared in the aisle. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and deep circles marked her face. Her eyes widened when she saw Oliver next to her daughter. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Mom, this is Oliver," Lily introduced, excited. He was sad because his grandma died, so I gave him a hug. "Lily," the mother scolded, "how many times have I told you not to talk to strangers?" "But he's not a stranger, Mom. He's my friend." The woman ignored her daughter's comment, turning to Oliver with eyes flashing with anger. "And you, Aunt? You ashamed of taking advantage of the kindness of a sick child?" "I didn't. That's not what—" "Mom, stop it. He was just sad." "That's enough, Lily," the mother cut in. "Get back to your seat, mister, and stay away from my daughter." Oliver opened his mouth to protest, but something in that woman's gaze made him recoil. There was more than just maternal protection there. There was a deep-seated animosity he didn't understand. He returned to his seat, confused and shaken, still hearing Lily's voice in the background, trying to explain to her mother that he hadn't done anything wrong. But that wasn't what bothered him. It was the fact that, for the first time in years, he had felt something other than the emptiness that consumed him. That little girl, in just a few minutes, had managed to touch him in a way that no one else had since his grandmother. And now, watching discreetly as the mother helped Lily get more comfortable in her seat, adjusting the IV drip with practiced gestures that betrayed long experience, an idea began to form in his mind. He had money, lots of money, more than he would ever need. Maybe he could use some of it to help that girl, give her the treatment she obviously needed. It was the least he could do after what she had done for him. Little did he know that this seemingly simple decision would trigger a series of events that would forever change not only Lily's life, but especially his own, and that chance encounter on a turbulent night would mark the beginning of a journey that would make him question everything he had always believed about love, money, and the true meaning of family. Amelia couldn't sleep. Sitting in her airplane seat, she watched Lily, who had finally fallen asleep. Her daughter's face was paler than usual, and the deep circles under her eyes betrayed the exhaustion from her latest chemotherapy session. Her fingers gently caressed the girl's thinning hair as she tried to hold back the tears that kept welling up. She couldn't show weakness. Not now. She had to be strong for Lily. But it was so hard. The money was running out, and the treatment at Johns Hopkins, her last hope, cost more than she could ever afford. She had sold everything she owned, mortgaged the small house she had inherited from her parents, and still, it wasn't enough. Her eyes involuntarily turned to the man a few rows ahead. Even from the back, his rigid posture and expensive suit betrayed his social class. Just another one of those wealthy businessmen who thought they could buy anything and anyone. Her stomach churned as she remembered the way he had approached Lily. Memories of the past hit her with full force. She could clearly see the face of Richard Miller, the businessman who had destroyed her family 10 years ago. With his empty promises and fake smile, he had convinced her parents to invest their life savings in his company. "It's a safe investment," he guaranteed. "You'll triple your money in less than a year." Her parents, simple and honest people, believed him. They sold the grocery store they had run for 30 years, mortgaged their house, took out loans. They put everything in the hands of that man who seemed so trustworthy. 3 months later, the company declared bankruptcy. Richard disappeared with the investors' money, leaving behind a trail of debt and ruined lives. Her father couldn't handle the blow. A heart attack took him in less than a week. Her mother, devastated by the loss and the guilt, was never the same. She slowly withered away until pneumonia took her 2 years later. And Amelia was left alone, 7 months pregnant, abandoned by her boyfriend, who didn't want the responsibility of a child. Since then, she had sworn she would never trust wealthy people again. She knew that behind their smiles and seemingly generous gestures, there was always a hidden agenda. They always wanted something in return. A sudden movement from Lily brought her back to the present. The girl was moving restlessly in her sleep, her forehead furrowed in pain. Amelia adjusted the IV drip, checking the flow as the nurse had taught her. It was the last bag they had. It needed to last until they got to Baltimore. "Is she running a fever again?" The deep voice startled her. Oliver was standing in the aisle, looking at Lily with genuine concern. Amelia felt the blood boil in her veins. "I told you to stay away from my daughter," she whispered with suppressed anger, so as not to wake Lily. "I just want to help," he insisted, keeping his voice low. "I can see that she needs specialized medical treatment. I can afford to. I don't need your charity." Amelia snapped, the words coming out like venom. "I don't want anything from you or any other rich guy who thinks he can buy people." "It's not charity," he argued, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "Your daughter helped me through a difficult moment. I just want to repay the favor." "Repay the favor?" Amelia laughed without humor. "And how much do you think the comfort my daughter gave you is worth? What price do you put on a sincere hug? You're all the same. You think everything can be bought and sold." "That's not it at all," Oliver tried to explain, but Amelia wouldn't listen. "Listen to me," she leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play, but stay away from my daughter. I don't need your pity or your money. I've seen what happens when people like you decide to help others. I won't let you destroy what's left of my family." Oliver opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment Lily began to cough, a dry, deep cough that shook her fragile body. Amelia immediately turned to her daughter, completely forgetting Oliver's presence. "Easy, sweetie," she whispered, helping Lily sit up. "Breathe slowly. That's it. Just like that." When the coughing fit finally passed, Lily was paler than before, beads of cold sweat dripping down her forehead. Amelia wiped her face with a tissue, her heart aching as she saw how weak her daughter was. "Mom," Lily murmured, her eyes half closed. "Where's Oliver?" Amelia looked around. He had disappeared silently during the coughing fit. All the better. "It doesn't matter, honey. Try to sleep a little more. We still have a long way to go." But as she lulled Lily back to sleep, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of despair that consumed her. The money she had saved would barely cover the initial consultations in Baltimore. How would she pay for the complete treatment? How would she save her daughter? No, she couldn't think like that. She would find a way. She always had. She had raised Lily alone until now, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. She had learned to do dressings, administer injections, interpret lab results. She had faced sleepless nights in the corridors of public hospitals, fought with doctors and nurses to get care. She wasn't going to give up now, but for the first time in a long time, Amelia allowed a single tear to roll down her face. A tear of fear, of exhaustion, of helplessness. A tear that carried the weight of all the others she had held back over the years. Across the aisle, hidden in the shadows of the dimly lit cabin, Oliver watched the scene in silence. Something in that woman's dignity, in her strength, even in the face of despair, touched him deeply. It reminded him of his grandmother, who had also been like that, proud and determined to the end. But unlike Amelia, his grandmother had resources. She had been able to fight cancer with every weapon available, without worrying about costs, and even so, she hadn't survived. The thought that this sweet little girl could have the same fate for lack of money was unbearable. He couldn't allow it. There had to be a way to help, even against Amelia's will. He returned to his seat, his mind working furiously. He had connections. He knew the best doctors in the country. He could use his influence to ensure that Lily received the best treatment possible. He just needed to figure out a way to do it without Amelia noticing his interference. He picked up his phone, ignoring the warning that electronic devices should remain switched off during the flight. There were people he needed to contact, arrangements he needed to make, the hospital in Baltimore, where they were probably going. Yes, he would start there. But as he typed messages and made discreet calls, a voice in the back of his mind bothered him, What if Amelia was right? What if he was just being selfish, trying to buy a sense of purpose? Was he really wanting to help Lily or just fill his own emptiness? The plane continued its journey through the night, cutting through dark clouds that were occasionally lit by distant lightning. Somewhere out there, a storm was brewing. And inside the aircraft, even stormier tensions and emotions were beginning to take shape, about to transform the lives of everyone involved forever. The airport in Baltimore was bustling with activity that humid morning. Oliver watched from afar as Amelia struggled with her worn suitcase and Lily's IV stand. The girl was visibly weaker, needing to lean on her mother with every step. Her face had taken on a grayish tone that made Oliver's heart clench. He wanted to help, to approach, to offer support, but he knew Amelia would refuse, so he kept his distance, discreetly following them as they made their way to the arrival area. He had made some calls during the flight, mobilized contacts. Now, he just needed to make sure his plan worked. "Mom, I feel dizzy." Lily's weak voice reached his ears. Amelia immediately dropped the suitcase, supporting her daughter before she fell. "Hold on, honey. We're going to get a cab." Oliver saw her open her purse, counting and recounting some crumpled bills. Her hand trembled slightly. She realized the exact moment when reality hit her. She didn't have enough money even for the cab to the hospital. That's when his plan began to unfold. A social worker, whom he had contacted during the flight, approached the pair. "Ms. Amelia Santos?" the woman asked, consulting a clipboard. "I'm Marie from the Patient Assistance Program at St. Luke's Hospital. I was sent to pick you up." Amelia frowned, confused. "There must be some mistake. I didn't request any assistance." "There's no mistake," Marie smiled gently. "Your case was referred to our patient support program. We have a car waiting, and we've already arranged your admission." "But how? I haven't even been able to schedule an appointment yet." "Sometimes little miracles happen," Marie replied, winking at Lily, who, despite her weakness, smiled back. Oliver watched as the three walked away, Marie helping with the suitcase and the IV stand. His heart was racing. It was just the first step, but it had worked. Now he needed to make sure. The rest of the plan also went smoothly. He picked up his cell phone and called his driver. "Take me to St. Luke's Hospital, and on the way, I need you to stop at a few places." 2 hours later, Amelia was sitting next to the bed where Lily was finally resting. The room was better than any they had ever been in, clean, spacious, with a view of the city through large windows. A nurse had just left after installing a new bag of medication. Something was wrong. It was too good to be true. Assistance programs didn't offer private rooms or expensive medications without at least a preliminary assessment. Her suspicions were confirmed when the door opened and Oliver walked in carrying a paper bag. "What did you do?" She stood up, her fists clenched. "It was you, wasn't it? You're behind all this." "Please, keep your voice down," he asked, looking worriedly at the sleeping Lily. "Let's talk outside." In the hallway, Amelia exploded. "How dare you? Who do you think you are to interfere in our lives like this?" "Someone who just wants to help," he replied, keeping his voice calm. "Lily needs treatment. You know that better than anyone." "I don't want your help. I don't need your charity." "It's not charity." He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. It's gratitude. Your daughter stopped me from doing something crazy on that plane. She gave me back hope when I was about to..." He stopped abruptly, realizing he had said too much. But Amelia wasn't a fool. Her eyes widened with understanding. "You were going to... My God, you were going to try to open the airplane door, weren't you? That's what you were doing there when Lily saw you." Oliver lowered his eyes, ashamed. "I wasn't thinking straight. My grandmother's death, the loneliness, it seemed like nothing made sense anymore. And then your daughter appeared, with that innocence, that natural goodness. And now you want to buy that goodness?" Amelia laughed without humor. "You want to cleanse your conscience by using us. No, it's not like that at all. He stepped closer, pleading with his eyes for her to understand. For the first time in years, I feel like I can do something that really matters. I'm not trying to buy anything. I just want to repay what Lily did for me. And then what? When you get tired of playing benefactor, when you find another charity project more interesting. I've seen it happen before, you know. Her voice trembled. As she continued, wealthy people like you show up, offering help, making promises. And when they get what they want, they disappear, leaving only destruction behind. Oliver was about to respond, but something in her tone made him stop. There was more than just prejudice against wealthy people there. It was an old pain, a wound that had never completely healed. What happened? He asked softly. Who hurt you like this? For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. Her face closed into a mask of coldness. But then, perhaps because of exhaustion, perhaps because of the pressure of the last few days, the words began to come out. Richard Miller. The name came out like venom from her mouth. A businessman just like you. He came to our town with great promises. He convinced my parents to invest their life savings in his business. It was everything they had. The grocery store they had run for 30 years, the house where we lived, everything. Her voice faltered, but she continued. 3 months later, he declared bankruptcy and disappeared with everyone's money. My father had a heart attack when he found out. My mother, she never recovered. She died 2 years later, of sadness more than of illness. Oliver felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The name was familiar. Richard Miller had been investigated for fraud in several states, but he always managed to escape justice through legal loopholes and well-placed bribes. I'm so sorry, he murmured, knowing the words were inadequate in the face of so much pain. Your pity is useless to me, she retorted, angrily wiping away a tear that stubbornly refused to stop falling. So is your money. I learned the hard way that you can't trust people like you. I'm not like Richard Miller, Oliver protested. I'm not trying to deceive anyone. No? Then why all this manipulation? Why didn't you come talk to me directly instead of pulling strings behind the scenes? He had no answer to that. She was right. He had acted in the shadows, used his contacts and influence to get what he wanted. I'm sorry, he said finally. You're right. I should have been honest from the beginning. But I saw how you reacted on the plane, and I was afraid you'd refuse help again. Amelia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to see through him, to discover his true intentions. Why? She asked finally. Why do you care so much? It was the question he had been asking himself since he got off the plane. Why couldn't he just go on with his life and forget about that little girl and her distrustful mother? Because for the first time since my grandmother died, I feel like I can do something that really matters, he replied sincerely. It's not pity or an attempt to buy gratitude. It's a chance to give meaning to all this money I inherited. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the results of Lily's preliminary tests. Look at this. She needs to start treatment immediately. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, maybe even a transplant. Can you afford all this? Amelia took the paper with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the numbers, the medical terms, the astronomical figures listed at the end. Her face paled. No, she whispered, defeated. I can't. Then let me help, Oliver pleaded. Not for you, not for me, for Lily. Before she could answer, an alarm sounded inside the room. Lily's heart monitor was spiking. In seconds, nurses and doctors flooded the room, pushing them outside. What's happening? Amelia screamed, trying to get back to her daughter. Lily, Lily! Oliver held her by the shoulders, preventing her from interfering with the medical team's work. She struggled in his arms, sobbing, as they watched helplessly the frantic activity around Lily's bed. In that moment, all the barriers between them seemed to disappear. They were no longer the wealthy businessman and the distrustful mother. They were just two people united by concern for that little girl who, in some inexplicable way, had touched their lives so deeply. The hours dragged on in the hospital waiting room. Amelia paced back and forth, her worn sandals making a rhythmic noise against the tile floor. Each time the double doors opened, she stopped, holding her breath, only to resume walking when another doctor or nurse passed without bringing news of Lily. Oliver remained seated, watching her in silence. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but what words could ease the despair of a mother whose child is fighting for her life? So he just stayed there, his presence a silent witness to her suffering. The clock on the wall marked 3 hours. Since Lily had gone into crisis, 3 hours of agony, of whispered prayers, of contained tears. The white walls of the hospital seemed to suffocate Amelia, bringing back memories she was desperately trying to forget. "It was like this with my mother," she murmured suddenly, still pacing. "The same waiting, the same silence. The doctors going in and out without saying anything until one of them finally came with that expression that you already know what it means even before he opens his mouth." Her voice faltered, and she stopped walking, leaning against the wall. Her legs were shaking so badly they seemed unable to support her. Oliver stood up instinctively, wanting to support her, but she raised a hand, keeping him at a distance. "I don't need your help," she said. But her voice no longer had the hostility of before. It was just tired, defeated. "Yes, you do," he replied softly. "We all need help sometimes. It's not weakness to accept an outstretched hand." She laughed. "Without humor, an outstretched hand? Is that what you think you're offering? No, you're offering golden chains. Every favor of yours is a debt I can never repay." "I don't want you to pay anything," he protested. "Why is it so hard to believe that someone might want to help without expecting something in return? Because I learned the hard way that nothing in this life is free." She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, not caring about the dirt or appearances. "Especially when it comes from people like you." Oliver sat down next to her, keeping a respectful distance. "Like me? Rich, you mean?" "Privileged," she corrected. "People who've never had to struggle for anything in their lives, who think they can solve everything with money." "Oh, you don't know anything about me," he said, a touch of bitterness in his voice. "Or about my struggles." "Oh, don't I?" She turned her head to face him. "What do you know about waking up in the middle of the night and not having enough money for medicine? About having to choose between buying food or paying the electric bill? About watching your child wither away because you can't afford the treatment they need?" Her words hit him like slaps, each one carrying the weight of years, of struggle and suffering. She was right. He had never experienced any of that. Even in the most difficult moments, he always had the comfort of knowing he had the resources to solve any problem. "No," he admitted finally. "I don't know anything about that. But I do know about loneliness, about losing the only person who really cared about you, about having all the money in the world and still feeling completely empty." It was her turn to be silent, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. "My grandmother," he continued, "was the only one who really saw me. Not the successful businessman, not the millionaire, but the scared boy I still am inside. When she died, it was like she took a part of me with her." "That's why you wanted to kill yourself on the plane?" she asked, her voice softer now. He nodded, ashamed. It seemed like nothing made sense anymore. All that money, all the success, what was it for? It couldn't buy what I really wanted, true love, real connection. "And now you think you can buy that by helping my daughter?" "No," he replied immediately. "Your daughter already gave me something that no money can buy, hope. When she hugged me on that plane, without knowing me, without wanting anything in return, It was like a ray of light had pierced all the darkness I was immersed in. Amelia studied him for a long time, as if trying to decipher a particularly complicated puzzle. "You really believe what you're saying, don't you?" she asked finally. "Every word." She sighed deeply. "That doesn't mean I trust you. I've seen seemingly sincere people reveal themselves to be monsters later." "I'm not asking you to trust me," he replied. "Just let me help Lily. Then you decide if you want me to continue being a part of your lives or not." Before she could answer, the double doors opened again. This time the doctor who came out walked directly towards them. Both stood up quickly, their hearts pounding. "Ms. Santos," he called, consulting a clipboard, "we managed to stabilize your daughter. It was a severe crisis, but she's responding well to the medication now." Amelia released the breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. Her legs weakened, and this time, when Oliver took her arm, she didn't protest. "Can I see her?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Soon," the doctor replied, "but first we need to talk about the treatment. Her condition is more serious than we initially thought. We'll need to start chemotherapy immediately, and there's a possibility we'll need a bone marrow transplant in the near future." Amelia's face paled even more. How much is all this going to cost?" The doctor hesitated, glancing at Oliver. "Mr. Lancaster has already guaranteed that all expenses will be covered. You don't need to worry about that now. The important thing is to focus on Lily's treatment." Amelia turned to Oliver, her eyes wide. "What did you do? What needed to be done?" he replied simply. "Now please, let the doctors do their work. We'll talk about the rest later." She opened her mouth to protest, but at that moment a nurse appeared to take her to Lily's room. After one last confused look at Oliver, she followed the nurse down the white corridors of the hospital. Oliver stayed behind, exhausted physically and emotionally. He knew the battle was far from over. Not only Lily's fight against the disease, but also his own fight to prove to Amelia that his intentions were genuine. He took out his cell phone and made a few calls. He needed to rearrange his schedule, cancel appointments, delegate responsibilities. He didn't want to, go back to his normal life now. Something more important required his attention. When he finished the calls, he walked to the hospital chapel. He wasn't a religious man. Years in the business world had hardened his faith. But at that moment, feeling the weight of all the decisions and responsibilities he'd taken on, he needed a moment of silence and reflection. He sat down on the last pew and closed his eyes. The image of his grandmother came to mind, smiling. In that special way she had, as if she knew some wonderful secret that she would one day share with him. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Grandma," he whispered into the silence of the chapel. "I hope you're proud of me." A strange peace enveloped him, as if she could really hear him and approved of his actions. When he opened his eyes again, he was sure of one thing. No matter what Amelia thought of him or how long it took to earn her trust, he wouldn't give up. He had found a purpose, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The days at the hospital turned into an exhausting routine. Lily began chemotherapy, and each session seemed to suck a little more of her vital energy. Her hair, already thin, began to fall out completely. But even in the most difficult moments, her smile remained intact, illuminating the room with a strength that moved everyone around her. Amelia practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair next to her daughter's bed. She had taken a leave of absence from work, but she knew she would soon have to go back. The bills kept coming, and the little money she had saved was running out quickly. One morning, while Lily was sleeping, Amelia found a manila envelope on the bedside table. Inside was money, a lot of money, and a simple note: "For basic expenses. It's not charity, it's necessity." It wasn't signed, but she knew very well who it was from. Her first impulse was to return everything, But then she looked at Lily, so fragile in her hospital bed, and felt her pride waver. What right did she have to refuse help when her daughter's life was at stake? "Mom." Lily's weak voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Is Oliver coming today?" Amelia sighed. In recent weeks, Oliver had become a constant presence at the hospital. He appeared every day, always bringing something: a new book, a game, a story to tell. Lily eagerly awaited his visits, and even Amelia had to admit that he had a special way with the girl. "I don't know, honey. He must be busy with his work. But he promised he was going to teach me how to play chess today," Lily protested, pouting. As if he had heard the conversation, Oliver appeared at the door at that moment, carrying a chessboard under his arm. "A promise is a promise," he said, smiling at Lily. The girl's face lit up. "You came." "Of course I came. I never break a promise, especially with my favorite chess student." Amelia watched as he sat on the edge of the bed, patiently explaining the rules of the game to Lily. There was something different about him. The impeccable suit and rigid businessman's posture had given way to more casual clothes and a more relaxed attitude. He seemed more human. "The queen is the most powerful piece in the game," he explained, showing the piece to Lily. "She can move in any direction, as many squares as she wants." "Just like my mom," exclaimed Lily. "She's also the strongest person I know." Oliver glanced at Amelia, who pretended to be busy arranging the pillows. "Your mom is very strong," he agreed. "But you know, sometimes even the strongest people need to accept help." Amelia felt the weight of those words. She knew they weren't directed only at Lily. The morning passed quickly as they played. Lily proved to be an eager student, absorbing each explanation with genuine interest. Even when fatigue began to take over, she insisted on finishing the game. "Checkmate," Oliver announced finally, knocking down Lily's king. "That's not fair. You have more experience," she protested, but she was laughing. "I want a rematch tomorrow." "Tomorrow you need to rest," Amelia interrupted. "You have chemo early." Lily's smile faded a little. She hated the chemotherapy sessions, not because of the treatment itself, but because of the effect it caused. Nausea, weakness, pain all over her body. "I can come after the session," Oliver offered. "Bring some ice cream, who knows?" "You can't," Amelia cut in. "She gets very sensitive after chemo. She needs to rest." A shadow of disappointment passed over Oliver's face, but he recovered quickly. "Your mum's right, but I promise I'll come back as soon as you're feeling better." As he got up to leave, Lily called him back. "Oliver, are you sad too today?" He stopped, surprised by the question. "Why do you think that?" "Your eyes," she replied simply. "They're the same as that day on the plane." Oliver swallowed hard, clearly touched by the girl's perception. It's my grandmother's birthday today," he admitted. "It would be, I mean." "I'm sorry," said Lily, stretching out her arms for a hug. "Want me to keep you company for a bit?" Amelia watched the scene with a lump in her throat. His daughter, even sick, even facing her own battle, still found the strength to comfort others. Oliver hugged Lily gently, as if she were made of crystal. "You already do so much for me, just by existing, little one," he whispered. When he finally left, he left behind a silence heavy with unspoken emotions. Amelia busied herself tidying the room, trying not to think about how much her resistance was beginning to weaken. Later, while Lily was sleeping, Amelia found another envelope, this time hidden inside the chessboard. But there wasn't any money inside, just a letter. "Amelia, I know you don't trust me, and you have every reason not to. I know that every gesture I make, every attempt to help, is seen as a threat or a form of manipulation. But I need you to understand one thing. Before I met Lily, I was just an empty shell, a rich and lonely man who had completely lost his way in life. Your daughter saved me, not just on that day on the plane, but every day since then. Each smile, of hers, each moment of strength in the face of suffering, each demonstration of kindness. All of this teaches me something new about the true value of life. I'm not trying to buy a place in your lives. I don't want your gratitude or your respect. I just want the chance to repay in some way what Lily did for me. And if that means having to prove my sincerity every day for as long as it takes, then that's what I'll do. The money I left isn't charity. It's an investment in hope. Use it as you see fit. Tear it up, return it, donate it to other families. The decision is yours. But know that I will continue to be here, regardless of what you decide. Because Lily taught me that some things are bigger than pride, bigger than distrust, bigger than any amount of money. With respect, Oliver. Amelia reread the letter several times, tears blurring her vision. Something inside her was beginning to crumble, that wall of protection she had built over the years, brick by brick, of disappointment and suffering. She looked at her sleeping daughter, at the IV drip running in her veins, at the machines monitoring her vital signs. How much longer could she maintain her inflexible stance? How much would her pride cost? She picked up the envelope with the money she had found earlier. She was about to make a decision that would change everything, but she still didn't know, if for better or worse. The weight of the past and the fear of the future fought within her as the night slowly progressed in the silent hospital room. Amelia's decision cost her an entire night of insomnia. When the sun rose, she was already standing, looking out the hospital window as the city slowly awakened. Her deep circles under her eyes betrayed the internal battle she had fought throughout the night. The envelope with the money weighed in her pocket like lead. After hours of turning the situation over in her mind, she had come to a conclusion. She would accept Oliver's help, but on her own terms. It wouldn't be a complete surrender, but a cautious truce. Lily woke up with severe nausea, the result of her last chemotherapy session. Amelia held back her hair, the few that were left, while she vomited into a plastic basin. Each heave of her daughter was like a knife in her heart. "Sorry, Mom," Lily murmured, pale and shaky. "Sorry for what, my love? For giving you so much trouble, for being sick." Amelia felt tears burn her eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed and hugged her daughter carefully. "Never say that again," she whispered against her hair. "You're not to blame for anything, and it's no trouble taking care of you. It's the greatest privilege of my life." Lily snuggled into her mother's arms, her small hand seeking hers. "Mom, don't you like Oliver?" The question caught Amelia by surprise. "Why are you asking that?" "It's just, you always act different when he's here, like you're angry." Amelia sighed deeply. How to explain the complexities of the adult world to an 8-year-old child? How to talk about betrayal, distrust, fear? "It's not that I don't like him, honey. It's just, sometimes it's hard to trust people." "But he's so nice," Lily protested, "and he always keeps his promises. Did you know he told me that he saved all the pieces of my hair that fell out? He said he's going to make a special wig. For me, just like my hair used to be?" Amelia felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't know about that detail, about the strands of hair that fell out during treatment, saved with such care. It was such a delicate gesture, so thoughtful. Her reflections were interrupted by the arrival of the nurse, Marie, bringing the morning medications. While helping Lily take her medicine, Marie commented casually, "Mr. Lancaster has already called 3 times today, wanting to know how she spent the night." 3 times, Amelia frowned. "What time is it?" "Just 7:30, Marie replied with a smile. "The first call was at 5 in the morning." Something about this information stirred Amelia. She imagined Oliver awake in the middle of the night, worried about Lily. It didn't seem like the behavior of someone who was just trying to clear his conscience. When Marie left, Amelia picked up her cell phone. She had made a decision, and the sooner she put it into practice, the better. She typed a short message to Oliver. "We need to talk. Can you come to the hospital today?" The reply arrived almost instantly. "I'm on my way." Half an hour later, Oliver walked into the room. He looked different, his hair disheveled, unshaven, deep circles under his eyes. It seemed like he hadn't slept either. "How is she?" he asked immediately, looking at Lily, who had fallen asleep again. "She had a rough night," Amelia replied. "Can we talk outside?" In the hallway, Amelia took the envelope out of her pocket. Oliver watched her, his face a mask of apprehension. "I read your letter," she began. "Several times, actually. And you're right. Some things are bigger than pride." She held out the envelope to him, but he made no move to take it. "I don't want the money back," he said. "I'm not returning it," she replied. "I'm proposing a deal." Oliver raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What kind of deal?" "I'm going to accept your help," Amelia said, the words coming out with difficulty. "But with conditions." "I'm listening. First, I want everything documented. Every penny spent, every procedure, every medication. I don't want any future surprises." Oliver nodded. "Fair. What else?" "Second, I don't want Lily to know that you're paying for the treatment. I don't want her to feel indebted." "Agreed. Anything else?" Amelia took a deep breath before continuing. "Third, when this is all over, when she's healed, you're going to walk away." Oliver took a step back, as if he had been slapped. "What? Why?" "Because I don't want her to get more attached than she already is," Amelia replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want her to suffer when you inevitably move on with your life." "What if I don't want to move on with my life?" he retorted. "What if this is my life now?" "Please." Amelia closed her eyes, tired. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "I can't accept that last condition," he said firmly. "I'm not going to promise to abandon Lily when she gets better. That would be cruel. More cruel would be for her to get used to your presence and then lose you when you get tired of playing benefactor." "I'm not playing anything." His voice rose a little, causing some people in the hallway to look in their direction. Lowering his tone, he continued, "Lily and you're the only real thing in my life now, the only thing that makes sense." Amelia felt the tears she had been holding back begin to fall. "Please," she repeated, "don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not promising anything beyond what I've already proven in the last few days," he replied softly. "I'm here. I'm going to stay here, and if you let me, I'll show you that not all rich men are like Richard Miller." The name hit Amelia like a punch in the stomach. "Don't talk about him." "I need to talk about him," Oliver insisted, "because he's the one standing between us. He's the ghost that won't let you trust, that won't let you accept that someone can really care without ulterior motives." "You don't know anything about it," she tried to pull away, but he gently held her arm. "I know more than you imagine," he said. "I did some research on Richard Miller. I know what he did to your family. I also know that he was never punished, that he's still out there, probably destroying other lives." Amelia pulled her arm away, trembling. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that I'm not like him, and that if you let me, I can prove it every day, for as long as it takes." Before she could answer, a scream came from Lily's room. Both ran back, finding the girl in the midst of another episode of violent vomiting. Without thinking, they worked. Together, Amelia holding Lily, Oliver fetching water and towels, calling the nurse. It was like a silent dance, each anticipating the other's needs, focused only on comforting that little warrior who was fighting so bravely. When they finally managed to calm Lily, she held each of their hands. "Stay here?" she asked in a weak voice, looking at both of them. "Both of you?" Amelia and Oliver exchanged a look across the bed. At that moment, all the discussions, all the conditions and promises seemed insignificant in the face of the simple request of a child who just wanted the comfort of the two people who had become her safe haven. "Of course we'll stay, sweetheart," Amelia replied, sitting on one side of the bed. For as long as you want, Oliver added, taking the chair on the other side. And so they remained, united by love for that little girl who, without knowing it, was slowly breaking down the barriers between them. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a golden light on the trio, as if blessing that moment of truce, that instant of peace amidst the storm that had not yet ended. The weeks turned into months, and the hospital routine had become second nature to everyone. Autumn was coming to an end, bringing with it cold winds that made the windows of Lily's room vibrate at night. The treatment continued intensely, each day a new battle, each small victory celebrated as a miracle. That particular morning, Amelia watched her daughter sleep, noticing how much thinner she had become. The doctors said it was normal, that it was part of the process, but her mother's heart clenched at every bone that became more visible under her pale skin. A movement at the door caught her attention. It was Oliver, arriving earlier than usual. There was something different about him today, a tension in his shoulders that wasn't usually there. He was carrying a folder of documents under his arm, and his expression was grave. "We need to talk," he said in a low voice, so as not to wake Lily. Amelia felt a shiver of apprehension. In recent months, she had learned to read Oliver's expressions, and something in his gaze worried her deeply. In the hallway, he opened the folder and began to show her some papers. They were test results, medical reports, graphs that Amelia didn't fully understand. "What is all this?" she asked, her heart racing. "The latest report from the medical team," he replied, his voice controlled but tense. "The chemotherapy, it's not working as we hoped." Amelia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What do you mean it's not working?" "But she seemed to be getting better." "The symptoms have improved, yes, but the disease is still progressing," he explained, pointing to one of the graphs. "We need to consider other options." "What other options?" "A bone marrow transplant," he said. "It's her best chance now." Amelia leaned against the wall, feeling her legs weaken. She knew what that meant. More suffering, more risks, more uncertainties. "And where are we going to find a compatible donor?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I've already started the search," Oliver replied. "I've activated all the bone marrow registries in the country, hired specialists in genealogical research to try to locate distant relatives who may be compatible." Amelia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that information. Her father... "Have you thought about that?" Oliver asked softly. "He abandoned us when he found out I was pregnant," she replied, the old bitterness evident in her voice. "I never heard from him again." "We can try to find him," Oliver suggested. "I have resources, contacts." "No!" Amelia cut in. "I don't want him near my daughter. He's already caused too much suffering." "Amelia," Oliver gently held her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "I know it's difficult, but we need to consider all possibilities. Lily's life is at stake." She shrugged off his hands, tears beginning to fall. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If he shows up now after everything, how am I going to explain it to her? How am I going to say that the father who never wanted to know her only came back because we need him?" "Sometimes we have to swallow our pride for the sake of those we love," he replied gently. "Pride," she laughed without humor. "You think it's pride, it's protection. I don't want her to suffer more than she's already suffering." At that moment, a scream came from the room. They ran back, finding Lily awake and crying in pain. "Mom, it hurts," she sobbed, clutching her chest. It hurt so much. The next few hours were a blur of doctors going in and out, nurses administering medications, machines beeping. Amelia and Oliver remained by the bed, each holding one of Lily's hands, helpless in the face of her suffering. When they finally managed to control the pain, Lily was exhausted. But even so, she looked at Oliver with her big, worried eyes. "You're sad again," she said. "Is it because of me?" "No, little one," he replied, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm just worried because I don't like to see you in pain." "But it will pass," she said with surprising conviction. "The pain always passes, doesn't it, Mom?" Amelia nodded, unable to speak. How could her daughter be so strong, so wise, while she felt like she was crumbling inside? Later, when Lily had finally fallen asleep again, Amelia found Oliver in the hospital chapel. He was sitting on the last pew, his face buried in his hands. "Were you crying?" she asked, sitting next to him. "Men cry too," he replied, without lifting his face, "especially when they feel completely helpless." "You're not helpless," she said. "You're doing everything you can. It's not enough." He finally lifted his face, revealing red, swollen eyes. "All my money, all my contacts, and I can't stop her from feeling pain?" Amelia felt her heart clench. It was the first time she had seen Oliver truly vulnerable, truly broken. "About her father," she began hesitantly. "You don't have to decide now," he interrupted her. "But we need to consider all the options. Can you really find him?" "I can try," he replied. "But only if you want me to." Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that decision on her shoulders. What if he refuses to help? What if he comes and then disappears again? How am I going to protect Lily from that pain? "Sometimes we can't protect the people we love from everything," he replied softly. "Sometimes all we can do is stand by them while they face their battles." Amelia let the tears flow freely now. "I'm so scared," she confessed. "So scared of losing her, so scared of making the wrong choice." Without thinking, Oliver pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they had touched like this, and surprisingly, there was no embarrassment, no resistance. It was just the mutual comfort of two people united by the same pain, by the same love. "We're not going to lose her," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to fight with every weapon we have. And if that means finding her father, facing ghosts from the past, then that's what we're going to do." Amelia pulled away slightly, wiping away her tears. "Okay," she said finally. "We're going to look for him. But I need you to promise me one thing." "What?" "If he shows up, if he wants to be a part of her life, will you still be here? Will you help protect her if he tries to hurt her again?" Oliver held her hands, his gaze intense and determined. "I'll be here as long as you want me around," he promised, "no matter what happens." At that moment, in the quietness of the hospital chapel, something changed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust. A trust born of shared pain, of joint fear, of the hope that stubbornly persisted despite everything. And as they walked back to Lily's room, they both knew that a new phase was beginning, a phase that would bring more challenges, more pain, more ghosts from the past to face. But now, at least, they were no longer alone in this battle. The search for Lily's father began discreetly. Oliver hired a team of private investigators, providing the few details that Amelia had managed to gather: a name, Charles Edward Santos, an approximate date of birth, and the last city where he had been seen 10 years ago. While the investigations were running in secret, Lily's condition gradually deteriorated. The pain was becoming more frequent, and the medications seemed less and less effective in controlling it. Amelia watched, helpless, as her daughter withered a little more each day. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after another bout of intense pain, Lily asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Mom, why hasn't my dad ever come to see me?" Amelia froze, the glass of water she was holding trembling in her hand. Oliver, who was organizing the medications on the bedside table, also stopped, attentive to the sudden tension in the room. "Why are you asking that now, honey?" Amelia managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just... there's a girl in the room next door who's also sick," Lily replied, her thin fingers playing with the edge of the sheet. "Her dad comes every day. He brings presents, tells stories, and I was wondering why mine never came." Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, her heart broken into 1,000 pieces. How to explain to an 8-year-old child that her father had chosen not to be a part of her life? "Not all families are the same, my love," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Some have a mom and dad, others just a mom, others just a dad. But why?" Lily insisted, her big eyes filled with a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Didn't he like me?" "It's nothing like that," Oliver intervened, gently approaching the bed. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, make the wrong decisions. But that has nothing to do with you." Amelia cast a grateful look at him. Somehow, he always knew what to say to calm Lily. "But I have you now, don't I?" Lily asked, reaching out her hand to Oliver. "You're like a dad to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia felt her heart stop for a moment, while Oliver seemed to have been struck by lightning. "Lily," Amelia began, but her daughter continued. "You come see me every day, bring presents, tell stories. Just like the girl's dad next door. And you're not going to leave, are you? Promise you won't leave." Oliver held Lily's small hand between his eyes shining with contained tears. "I promise," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm never leaving." At that moment, Oliver's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out, frowning at the number. "I need to take this," he said, quickly leaving the room. Amelia stayed with Lily, her heart heavy with the conversation they had just had. Minutes later, Oliver returned, his face pale and tense. "Amelia, can we talk outside?" In the hallway, he took a deep breath before speaking. They found him. Amelia felt her legs weaken. "Charles?" "Yes, he's living in Columbus, Ohio, married, has 2 children." The information hit Amelia like a punch in the stomach. 2 children. He had moved on, built another family, while she raised Lily alone. Does he know about Lily?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Not yet. The investigators only located him. The decision to make contact is yours." Amelia leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of that decision on her shoulders. How would Charles react to learning that he had a sick daughter? What if he refused to help? Or worse, what if he wanted to be a part of Lily's life, only to abandon her again later? "He needs to know," she said finally. "Not for him, but for her. It's our best chance of finding a compatible donor." "Do you want me to talk to him?" Oliver offered. "No," she replied firmly. "I need to do this personally. I need to look him in the eye and see if—" Her voice faltered, but Oliver understood. She needed to see if there was any regret, any humanity in the man who had abandoned her pregnant so many years ago. "I'll go with you," he said. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he cut in gently. "I'm not going to let you face this alone." Before she could answer, they heard a noise coming from Lily's room. They ran back, finding her in the midst of another pain crisis. "Mom!" she screamed, her small body contorting. "It hurts so much." The next few hours were a nightmare. The doctors were called, medications were administered, but nothing seemed to relieve Lily's pain. Amelia and Oliver remained by her side, holding her hands, helpless in the face of her suffering. When they finally managed to stabilize her, it was already dawn. Lily was sleeping, exhausted, while Amelia watched her, tears running silently down her face. "I can't wait any longer," she whispered to Oliver. "I need to find Charles tomorrow." "I'll arrange everything," he replied, already reaching for his cell phone. tickets, hotel. I can't leave her, Amelia cut in. Not like this. I'll stay with her, he offered. You'll go and come back the same day. I promise not to leave her side for a minute. Amelia looked at him for a long time, realizing how fundamental his presence had become in their lives. How had he gone from a stranger she distrusted to someone she would trust with her daughter's life? Okay, she finally agreed, but I need you to promise me one thing. What? If something happens while I'm gone, if she gets worse, I'll call you immediately, he assured her, and there's a private jet waiting at the airport, ready to bring you back at any time. She nodded, grateful for his efficiency and concern. She turned her gaze to Lily, her heart clenching at the thought of what the next day might bring. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? She asked in a low voice. I think you're doing the only thing possible, he replied. Sometimes we need to face our fears for the sake of those we love. Amelia held her sleeping daughter's hand, praying silently that she would have the strength to face what was to come. Tomorrow she would be face to face with the man who had broken her heart and abandoned her daughter. Tomorrow she would find out if there was any chance of salvation for Lily, and as the night slowly progressed, Amelia allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to fully feel the weight of her loneliness, her anger, her fear. But now, at least, she wasn't alone in this battle. She had Oliver by her side, a constant and comforting presence, even if she still couldn't fully admit how much she depended on him. The cafe in Columbus was almost empty at that time of the morning. Amelia sat at a table in the corner, her hands trembling as she held the cup of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. She had arrived too early, too anxious and nervous to wait at the hotel that Oliver had booked. Her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from him with a photo of Lily sleeping peacefully. Everything's fine here. Focus on what you need to. Edu. The message calmed her a little, but her heart was still pounding when the cafe door opened. Charles Edward Santos walked in, and Amelia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. He was older, with some grey hairs at his temples, but he still had that same confident walk that had attracted her 10 years ago. He was wearing a well-cut suit and carrying a leather briefcase, the perfect image of the successful businessman he had become. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Amelia saw a flash of recognition, followed by something that looked like guilt. He walked to her table, stopping a few steps away. "Amelia," he said, his voice more gravelly than she remembered, "you haven't changed a bit." "Sit down," she replied coldly. "We have a lot to talk about." He obeyed, unbuttoning his jacket in an automatic gesture. A gold wedding band shone on his left hand, making Amelia's stomach churn. "When I received your message," he began, but she interrupted him. "I'm not here for reminiscences, Charles. I'm here for Lily." "Lily?" He repeated the name as if it were a foreign word. "Our daughter," said Amelia, her voice trembling slightly. "The daughter you never wanted to know." Charles lowered his eyes to the table, his hands clenching into fists. "Amelia, She's dying," she cut in, the words coming out like knives from her mouth. "She has leukemia. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and you may be compatible." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles had paled, his hands now trembling, visibly. "Why didn't you look for me before?" he asked finally. "Before?" Amelia laughed without humor. "Before when, Charles? When you ran away, when you found out I was pregnant, when you moved to another city without leaving an address, or maybe when you were too busy building your new family?" He cringed, as if each word was a physical blow. "I was young. I was scared." "And I wasn't." Her voice rose, making some people look in their direction. Lowering her tone, she continued, "I was 20 years old. I had just lost my parents. I was completely alone and pregnant, but I faced everything, every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, every bill to pay. I faced everything alone. I'm sorry, he murmured, but the words sounded hollow. I don't want your apologies, she replied. I want you to take the compatibility test. That's the only thing I ask. Charles ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered well. I need to think, he said. I need to talk to my wife. Think? Amelia felt the anger grow in her chest. While you think your daughter is in a hospital bed, feeling pain that no child should feel. While you talk to your wife about how to tell your other children that they have a sick sister, Lily is fighting to survive. It's not that simple. He raised his voice too. I have an established life now, a family. And Lily isn't your family, she cut in. Doesn't her blood in your veins mean anything? Charles looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention they were attracting. Of course it does, he said, lowering his voice. But I need time to process all this, to organize things. Amelia picked up her purse and took out an envelope, throwing it on the table. Here are her tests, the medical reports, everything you need to know, she said in a trembling voice. There's also the card of the doctor in charge of the case. He's waiting for your contact to schedule the compatibility tests. She stood up, her legs shaky but her posture rigid. Do what you think you should do, Charles. But know one thing. If you choose not to help, if you let your daughter die for fear of what others will think, that will haunt you for the rest of your life. She turned to leave but stopped and looked at him one last time. Oh, and one more thing, you don't have to worry about being a part of her life afterward. Lily already has someone who loves her like a father should love. Someone who never abandoned her, who is by her side in every difficult moment. I just need your blood, nothing more. She left the cafe feeling the tears she had held back throughout the conversation begin to fall. Her cell phone rang. It was Oliver. How did it go? He asked, concern evident in his voice. He needs to think, she replied, her voice breaking. He needs to talk to his wife, organize things. Son of a... How's Lily? She cut in, not wanting to hear the swear words she knew were coming. She's fine. She just had breakfast. She's asking for you. I'm coming back on the next flight, she said, wiping away her tears. I can't stand being away from her for another minute. The jet is waiting, he replied. I sent the driver to pick you up. He should be arriving there in a few minutes. Amelia felt a wave of gratitude so strong that it almost knocked her over. Oliver, she began, but couldn't continue. No, he said softly. Just come home. We're waiting for you. Home. It was strange how the hospital had become her home, how Oliver had become part of her family, how something as terrible as Lily's illness had brought someone so special into their lives. On the flight back, Amelia couldn't hold back the tears. She cried for her daughter who was fighting so bravely against a cruel disease. She cried for herself, for the young woman who had been abandoned, pregnant and scared. She cried for the lost time, for the destroyed dreams, for the hopes she had placed in a man who didn't deserve them. But mostly she cried because she finally understood the difference between a biological father and someone who truly loves like a father. Charles may have had Lily's blood running in his veins, but Oliver had her heart, and maybe, Amelia was beginning to realize, he also had hers. When the plane landed in Columbus, she was exhausted but determined. It didn't matter what Charles decided. It didn't matter if he helped or not. They would survive, as they always had, and this time they weren't alone. What she didn't know was that while she was flying back to her daughter, events were unfolding that would change their lives forever. Fate, that cruel and unpredictable player, still had some cards up its sleeve. And the next play would be the most painful of all. When Amelia arrived at the hospital, she found Lily's room empty. Her heart stopped for a moment until a nurse quickly explained that the girl had been taken for some routine tests. Oliver was in the waiting room, pacing back and forth, his face tense. What happened? she asked, sensing that something was wrong. The doctors found something in the latest tests, he replied, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. They're doing more tests to confirm. Something? What kind of something? Before he could answer, Dr. Peterson, the doctor in charge of Lily's case, appeared in the hallway. His normally calm face was troubled. "Ms. Santos, can we talk in my office?" The walk there seemed to last an eternity. Amelia felt her legs heavy, as if she were walking through quicksand. Oliver remained by her side, his silent presence a necessary support. In the office, the doctor wasted no time with preliminaries. "The disease is progressing faster than we expected," he said, showing some images on his computer screen. "The latest test showed that the cancer cells have spread to other organs." Amelia felt the world spin. Oliver held her hand, squeezing it gently. "How long?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Without the transplant? Weeks, maybe a month." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia felt as if she were having a nightmare, one of those you desperately try to wake up from but can't. "We already have the results of the compatibility. Tests from the family," continued the doctor. "Unfortunately, you are not compatible. We need to find her father as soon as possible." I met him today," said Amelia, her voice trembling. "But he needs to think." "We don't have time for that," the doctor was emphatic. "Every day that passes decreases the chances of success of the treatment." "I'll get him," Oliver said suddenly, "even if I have to drag him here." "No," Amelia held his arm. "Let me handle this." She took out her cell phone and with trembling fingers typed a message to Charles. "The situation is more serious than I thought. The doctors give your daughter weeks to live. Please, don't let her die." The reply took only a few minutes. "I'll be there tomorrow." When they returned to the room, Lily had already returned from the tests. She was paler than usual, but smiled when she saw her mother. "You're back!" she exclaimed, stretching out her arms for a hug. Amelia hugged her carefully, feeling how her body was more fragile, lighter. "Of course I'm back, my love. I promised I would be quick, didn't I?" "Oliver didn't leave my side for a minute," Lily said. "He even tried to do magic tricks to distract me, but he's terrible at it." "Hey!" Oliver protested, feigning offense. "I thought I did very well with the card trick." "You dropped them, all on the floor," Lily laughed. And for a moment, just for a moment, everything seemed normal. But then she had a coughing fit, and the moment shattered. Amelia and Oliver rushed to help her, each on one side of the bed, working in perfect sync, as they had learned to do in recent months. When the crisis passed, Lily was exhausted. She fell asleep, holding each of their hands, as she often did. "Do you think he's really coming?" Amelia whispered to Oliver, after making sure Lily was sound asleep. "If he doesn't come, I'm going to get him myself," he replied, his voice laden with a contained anger. "And if he comes, and he's not compatible?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. It was the fear that neither of them wanted to admit out loud. "Then we'll search every bone marrow registry in the world," he replied firmly. "I'm going to mobilize all the resources I have. We're not giving up." Amelia looked at him, really looked, for the first time since this whole journey had begun. She saw the deep circles under his eyes, the weariness on his face, the steely determination in his gaze. She saw the man who had transformed from a stranger into her safe haven, from a threat into her greatest hope. "Why do you do all this?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much?" Oliver looked at the sleeping Lily before answering. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters," he said. "Because every smile of hers, every moment I spend with you, makes me feel more alive than all the years I spent accumulating money and power." He paused, as if gathering courage to continue. "And because I love you both." more than I thought it was possible. To love someone. The words hit Amelia like lightning. Her first instinct was to recoil, to raise again the barriers she had built over the years, but she was tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself. "Me too," she whispered, so low that for a moment she thought he hadn't heard. But he heard. Their eyes met across Lily's bed, and at that moment something changed between them. There were no kisses, no grand declarations, just the silent recognition of a feeling that had grown slowly, nurtured by shared suffering and by hope that refused to give up. The moment was interrupted by a nurse coming in to check Lily's vital signs. While she worked, Amelia and Oliver remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Night fell on the hospital, bringing with it that characteristic quietness of the late hours. In the hallway, occasional footsteps of nurses making their rounds. In the room, only the constant beep of the monitors and Lily's gentle breathing. Amelia looked at the clock. In a few hours, Charles would arrive. In a few hours, they would know if there was hope. In a few hours, her daughter's fate could be decided. But now, at this moment, all she could do was wait. Wait and pray that, for the first time in his life, Charles Edward Santos would do the right thing. What she didn't know was that fate, that tireless player, still had some surprises in store. Surprises that would test not only her strength, but also this newfound love that, like a stubborn flower, had managed to sprout amid so much suffering. The morning arrived grey and cold, as if the sky itself shared the apprehension that hung over the hospital. Amelia hadn't slept, alternating between watching Lily and obsessively checking her cell phone for messages from Charles. Oliver also remained awake, making calls in a low voice in the hallway, mobilizing contacts in case the compatibility test with Charles didn't work out. At 9 o'clock sharp, the hospital reception called, informing them that Charles had arrived. Amelia felt her stomach churn. "Do you want me to stay with Lily while you go down?" Oliver offered. "No," she replied, taking a deep breath. "I want you to come with me. I need you there." After checking that Lily was still sleeping soundly, they went down to the reception. Charles was there, still wearing an impeccable suit, but his posture was no longer as confident as in the cafe. Beside him, to Amelia's surprise, was an elegant woman of approximately his age. "This is Marina, my wife," Charles introduced as they approached. She wanted to come with me." Marina took a step forward, her red eyes indicating that she had been crying. "I know you must hate me," she said directly to Amelia, "but when Charles told me about Lily, I insisted on coming. No child should go through this alone." Amelia didn't know how to react. She had expected hostility. She had prepared herself for coldness, but not for this demonstration of compassion. "This is Oliver," she said finally, indicating the man beside her. He has been helping us a lot." The four followed Dr. Peterson to his office, where the procedures for the compatibility test were explained. Charles listened to everything, in silence, only nodding occasionally. "How long until we have the results?" Marina asked, holding her husband's hand. "With the urgency of the case, I can have the results in 24 hours, the doctor replied. "And if I'm not compatible?" Charles asked, his voice faltering for the first time. "Then we'll expand the search," Oliver replied firmly. "I'm already in contact with bone marrow registries all over the world." While Charles was taken to have his blood drawn, Marina stayed behind with Amelia and Oliver. "He didn't sleep all night," she said softly. "He was pacing around the house, looking at old photos from when he was young. I've never seen him like that." "It must have been a shock," Oliver commented, his voice neutral, but his eyes attentive to Amelia's reaction. "It was," Marina agreed, "but not for the reason you think. Charles, he always knew he had a daughter." Amelia felt as if she had been slapped. "What?" "He kept a newspaper clipping," Marina continued, avoiding looking directly at Amelia. "A small birth announcement that you published. Lily Santos, born April 15th. I found it by chance, a few years ago." Amelia staggered, and Oliver quickly steadied her. "He knew. All this time, he knew." "He was a coward," Marina said, and there was a harshness in her voice now. "Cowardly and selfish. When I met him, he was already established in Columbus, building his new life. He never mentioned that he had another daughter. I found out on my own, and when I confronted him—" She paused, as if remembering something painful. "He begged me not to bring it up. Said it was something from the past, that he couldn't change what he had done. I should have insisted more. I should have forced him to take responsibility." Tears streamed down Marina's face now. "When he arrived yesterday, devastated after meeting with you, telling me about Lily's illness, it was the first time I saw him truly regretful. Not just ashamed or guilty, but truly regretful." Amelia couldn't process all of this. The idea that Charles had always known about Lily's existence, that he had kept that newspaper clipping all these years, but never had the courage to look for them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Marina replied. "And because if he's compatible, if he can save Lily, maybe it's a chance for redemption, not just for him, but for all of us who allowed this situation to continue." At that moment, Charles returned. He looked pale and dejected, a cotton ball on his arm where they had drawn blood. "It's done," he said. "Now we wait." A heavy silence fell over the group. Amelia felt the weight of Marina's revelations, the anger growing in her chest. She wanted to scream at Charles, demand explanations, make him feel all the pain he had caused. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when Lily's life depended on him. Can I see her?" he asked hesitantly. Amelia exchanged a look with Oliver, who squeezed her hand gently in support. "She's sleeping," she replied finally, "and she doesn't know you're here. I'm not going to tell her until we have the test results. I don't want to give her false hope or hurt her even more." Charles nodded, looking even smaller. "I understand. We'll stay at a hotel nearby. Can you call me when you have the result?" Amelia agreed mechanically. She watched as Charles and Marina walked away, he leaning on her as if he couldn't walk alone. As soon as they were alone, Amelia broke down. Oliver hugged her as she sobbed, years of bitterness and resentment, finally overflowing. "He knew," she repeated between sobs. "He always knew." "Shh." Oliver rocked her gently. "It's going to be okay. I'm here with you." How could I be so stupid? How could I think he didn't know where we were, that he had no way to find us? "You weren't stupid," he said firmly. "You were strong. You raised Lily alone. You gave her all the love that he was never able to give." Amelia pulled back a little, wiping away her tears. "What if he's not compatible, Oliver? What if all this pain, all these revelations are in vain?" "Then we'll keep fighting," he replied, "like we always have, together." At that moment, Amelia's cell phone rang. It was the nurse from Lily's room. The girl had woken up and was asking for her mother. "Let's go," said Oliver softly. "Our daughter needs us." Our daughter. The words hit Amelia with full force. Yes, Lily was theirs now. It didn't matter what the compatibility test revealed. It didn't matter what Charles decided to do afterward. They were a family formed not by blood, but by love and shared pain. As they went back up to the room, Amelia felt a strange peace settle in her heart. The universe had a funny way of working. It had taken away an absent father for her daughter and given in return a man who loved Lily as his own. Maybe, just maybe, everything happened for a reason. But fate hadn't finished shuffling its cards. The next 24 hours would bring even more surprising revelations and test the limits of love and the capacity for forgiveness of everyone involved. The 24 hours of waiting for the results dragged on like an eternity. Lily had a rough night, with high fevers and pain that the medications barely managed to control. Amelia and Oliver took turns at her side, each trying to disguise their own tiredness and worry. The next morning, while Lily was finally managing to get some sleep, Amelia found something unexpected under her daughter's pillow, a small sketchbook. As she opened it, she felt her heart stop. On the first page, there was a colorful drawing of 3 people holding hands, a dark-haired woman who was clearly her, a little girl who would be Lily, and a tall man in a suit who could only be Oliver. Underneath, in her daughter's childish, shaky handwriting, was written, "My family." "What's this?" asked Oliver, who had just entered the room bringing coffee. Amelia showed him the drawing, unable to speak. Oliver looked at it for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly as he held the notebook. "She gave me this yesterday," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Said it was a secret, that she was saving it for a special moment." Amelia leafed through the rest of the notebook. There were more drawings, some of the hospital, others of moments they had shared together. In all of them, Oliver was present, always as part of the family. "How does she do it?" Amelia whispered, tears streaming silently. "How, even with so much pain, so much suffering, does she still manage to think of others, still manage to have a hope?" Oliver was about to answer when Dr. Peterson entered the room. His face was serious, and he was carrying a folder of documents. "The results are in," he said without preamble. Amelia felt her legs weaken. Oliver quickly put an arm around her, keeping her upright. "And?" she managed to ask. The doctor took a deep breath before replying. "Charles is not compatible." The words fell like stones in the silent room. Amelia felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. "But there's more," continued the doctor. "Something that the tests revealed. And that, well, we need to talk about it." He led them to his office, where Charles and Marina were already waiting. Charles looked as if he had aged 10 years since the day before, and Marina was holding his hand tightly. "What's going on?" asked Amelia, feeling that something was very wrong. Dr. Peterson opened the folder of results, his face professional but with a shadow of concern. "The tests not only showed that Mr. Charles is not compatible," he began, choosing his words carefully. "They showed that he cannot be Lily's biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia felt the world spin around her. "What?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "There are genetic markers that make this conclusive," continued the doctor. "There's no possibility of error." Amelia looked at Charles, who had covered his face with his hands. You knew about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," he replied without lifting his face. "I swear I didn't know." "But then why did you run? Why did you abandon us?" "Because it was easier," he replied, finally looking at her. "Because I was young and scared, and running away seemed simpler than facing the responsibilities. And then it was shame. Shame for having been a coward, shame for having abandoned you at that moment. So, during all these years, all this time that you kept that newspaper clipping, I thought she was my daughter," his voice faltered. "I wanted her to be. Maybe that's why I never had the courage to look for you. I was afraid of not deserving it, of not being worthy." Amelia felt the world crumble around her. If Charles wasn't Lily's father, then who was? Her mind desperately went back to that time, trying to remember, and then, like lightning, the memory hit her. Richard Miller, the businessman who had destroyed her family, who had approached her in those terrible days after her parents' death, who had disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived. "No," she whispered, horrified. "It can't be Amelia?" Oliver approached, concerned. "What is it? But before she could answer, a nurse burst into the office. "Dr. Peterson, patient Lily, she's having a cardiac arrest." The world seemed to go into slow motion. Amelia saw the doctor run out of the office, heard distant screams, felt Oliver pulling her through the corridors. But everything seemed unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. When they arrived at Lily's room, the scene was chaotic. Doctors and nurses moved frantically around the bed, while the high-pitched, continuous sound of the heart monitor cut through the air like a knife. "Lily!" Amelia screamed, trying to get closer. Oliver held her back, preventing her from interfering with the medical team's work. "Charging at 200, one of the doctors shouted. "Clear!" Lily's small body arched with the shock of the defibrillator. The monitor remained in a straight line. "Increase to 300. Clear!" Another shock. Nothing. "Come on, honey," Amelia whispered, clinging to Oliver. "Please don't leave us. Please. 360. Last attempt. Clear!" Lily's body arched one last time, and for one terrible moment, silence filled the room. And then, beep, beep, beep. The sweetest sound Amelia had ever heard in her life. Her daughter's heart was beating again, but the joy was short-lived. As soon as Lily was stabilized, Dr. Peterson approached them, his face more grave than ever. "We need to find a compatible donor immediately," he said. "She won't survive another crisis like this." Amelia looked at her daughter, now unconscious, in the bed, seeming even smaller and more fragile than before. Then she looked at Oliver, who hadn't let go of her hand for a single second during the whole crisis. "I need to find Richard Miller," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "He's Lily's last hope." Oliver's expression changed upon hearing the name, a shadow passing over his face. "Richard Miller," he repeated. "The businessman who destroyed my family," she finished, "and who may be my daughter's biological father." Fate, that tireless player, had revealed yet another of its cards. And this revelation would forever change not only Lily's future, but also the past that Amelia had tried so hard to forget. The name Richard Miller hung in the air like a dark cloud. Oliver had taken Amelia to the hospital chapel, the only place where they could have some privacy. She was sitting on one of the pews, trembling, while he held her hands in his. "Tell me," he asked softly. "I need to know everything so I can help." Amelia closed her eyes, the memories she had tried to bury for so long coming back in a whirlwind. "It was right after my parents died," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "I was lost, devastated. Richard appeared like a savior, said he had been a friend of my father, that he wanted to help." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "He was charming, sophisticated, took me to dinner, listened to me cry, promised he would take care of me. He was older, had experience. He made me feel safe for the first time since I lost my parents." Oliver squeezed her hands gently, encouraging her to continue. "It was just one night," her voice faltered. "One night of weakness, of loneliness. The next morning, he was gone. A week later, I discovered that he had convinced several other investors, including my parents, to put money into his company. He took everything, destroyed entire families." The tears were running freely down her face now. "When I found out, I was pregnant. Charles was starting to court me. He was young, gentle. I thought it could be his. I wanted to believe it was his. The idea that my daughter could be the fruit of that night, of that betrayal." "That's why you never looked for Richard?" Oliver asked softly. "How could I? He was a monster. He had destroyed my parents' lives, indirectly caused their deaths. I preferred to believe in the possibility of Charles, even when he ran away, even when I was left alone." Oliver was silent for a moment, processing everything he had heard. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more tense. "I know Richard Miller," he said finally. Amelia raised her head sharply. "What?" He was a partner of my father's. He was one of those responsible for the bankruptcy of our family business. My father never recovered from the blow, ended up dying of a heart attack, just like yours." "My God," Amelia whispered, the irony of the situation hitting her with full force. "But there's something you need to know," Oliver continued, his face tense. "Something I discovered years later, when I had already rebuilt my life. Created my own company." He stood up, pacing restlessly around the small chapel. "Richard Miller is dying," he said finally. "He has a rare type of pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him a few months to live." Amelia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "How do you know this?" "Because he looked me up a few weeks ago, wanting to make amends, settle old debts. Before he died, I sent him away, of course. I didn't want to hear anything he had to say." "Where is he?" Amelia asked, standing up too. "In a private hospital right here in Columbus. A high-end clinic specializing in palliative care." Amelia began to pace, her mind racing. "I need to see him," she said finally. "I need to tell him about Lily, ask him to take the compatibility test." "Amelia," Oliver gently held her arms, "he's very sick. He may not be able to help even if he wants to." "I have to try," she pulled away. "It's my daughter's last chance." At that moment, the chapel door opened. It was Marina, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Charles wants to talk to you before he leaves." They found Charles in the hallway, looking more dejected than ever. I'm so sorry," he said, looking directly at Amelia, "for everything, for being a coward, for running away, for pretending all these years that I had rights over a daughter who wasn't mine." "Charles," Marina began, but he interrupted her. "No, I need to say this," he continued. "Amelia, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that even though I'm not Lily's biological father, even though I've failed so many times, I care about her, and if there's anything I can do to help—" "There is," Amelia said, surprising everyone. "You can help me find Richard Miller." "Richard Miller?" Charles paled. "The man who may be Lily's father," she finished, "and who may be her last chance." Charles exchanged a look with Marina before answering. "My company has resources, contacts. I can help locate him, find out more about his current condition." "That won't be necessary," Oliver interrupted. "I know where he is." Before they could continue the conversation, a nurse appeared running. "Ms. Santos, your daughter is calling for you. She's agitated. We can't calm her down." Amelia ran back to Lily's room, finding her daughter awake but clearly confused. Her eyes glazed with fever. "Mom," she called in a weak voice, "I had a strange dream. There was a man. He was crying, apologizing." Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, holding Lily's small, hot hand in hers. "It was just a dream, honey," she said softly, exchanging a worried look with Oliver, who had entered right behind her. "No," Lily insisted. "It was real. He said he was very sorry, that he wished he had been different." Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. How could Lily know? "Where's Oliver?" Lily asked suddenly, her eyes searching the room until they found him. "Come here, please." He approached, sitting on the other side of the bed. "I'm here, little one." "Promise you won't leave?" she asked, her eyes beginning to close with exhaustion. "Promise you'll stay with us forever?" "I promise," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll never abandon you." Lily smiled faintly before falling asleep again, still holding each of their hands. Amelia looked at Oliver across Lily's bed, a decision forming in her eyes. "I need to see Richard today," she said. "No matter how sick he is, no matter if he wants to see me or not, it's the only chance we have." Oliver nodded, understanding the urgency in her voice. "I'll go with you," he said. "I'm not going to let you face this alone." What they didn't know was that as they made plans to find Richard Miller, Fate was once again shuffling its pieces. And the revelation that awaited them would be more surprising and painful than anyone could imagine. The clinic where Richard Miller was staying was an elegant place, with well-manicured gardens and an atmosphere of tranquility that contrasted drastically with the storm of emotions Amelia was feeling. Oliver drove the car to the main entrance, where a nurse was already waiting for them. He had called ahead, using his influence to ensure they would be received immediately. "Mr. Miller is having a difficult day," the nurse warned as she led them through the silent hallways. "The pain medication was increased this morning." Amelia barely heard. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it wanted to escape her chest. After so many years, she was about to meet the man who had destroyed her family, who possibly was her daughter's father, and who now might be Lily's last hope. The nurse stopped in front of a door and knocked softly before opening it. The room was spacious and well lit, with large windows overlooking the garden. In the bed, almost unrecognizable, was Richard Miller. The elegant and charming man Amelia remembered had completely disappeared. In his place was a frail being consumed by illness, his yellowish skin stretched over his bones, his eyes sunken in dark sockets, but when he saw them, those eyes widened with a glimmer of recognition. "Amelia!" His voice was barely a hoarse whisper. "Is that really you?" She took a step forward, feeling Oliver right behind her, his presence a source of strength. "Yes, Richard, it's me." He closed his eyes for a moment, a lone tear escaping his ravaged face. "I knew you'd come one day," he said. "I've been waiting for it, praying for it." "I didn't come for you," she cut in, her voice trembling slightly. "I came for Lily." His eyes opened again, now with a different expression. "Lily," he repeated the name as if it was something precious. "So you had the child?" "Yes. My daughter is dying, Richard. She has leukemia. She needs a bone marrow transplant urgently." Richard tried to sit up, but it was clearly too much effort for his weakened body. "And you think I might be her father?" "Yes. The tests proved that Charles isn't, and you're the only other possibility." A sob escaped Richard's skeletal chest. "I knew it," he said through tears. "Somehow, I always knew it. That's why I kept these all these years." With trembling hands, he pointed to a drawer next to the bed. Oliver stepped forward and opened it, finding inside a yellowed envelope. As he opened it, several photos fell onto the bed. They were newspaper clippings, photos taken from a distance. Amelia with a baby Lily in her arms, Lily on her first day of school, Lily playing in a park. Years of stolen moments, recorded by someone who watched from afar. You followed us?" Amelia asked. Horrified. "I hired an investigator," he replied, his voice failing. "I didn't have the courage to approach, to face what I had done, but I needed to know if you were okay." "Okay?" Amelia's voice rose. "You destroyed my family. You took all my parents' money, indirectly caused their deaths. And now you tell me you've been watching us from afar all these years." "I know." He coughed violently, spots of blood appearing on the tissue he used to cover his mouth. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but when I found out I was sick, when the doctors gave me the diagnosis, I realized I needed to try to do something right before I died." "That's why you looked me up," said Oliver, speaking for the first time since they entered the room. "It wasn't just about the old partnership with my father. It was about them." Richard nodded weakly. "I knew you had become close to them, that you were helping. I wanted to tell you everything, ask you to take care of them when I—" Another coughing fit interrupted him, more violent than the previous one. The nurse rushed in, checking his vital signs. "He needs to rest," she said firmly. "No!" Richard tried to sit up again. "I need to take the test. I need to try to help my daughter." "Richard," Amelia approached the bed, her voice softer now. "You're very sick. Even if you are compatible, it doesn't matter." He held her hand with surprising strength. "If there's a chance, however small, to do something right, to save our daughter, please, let me try." Amelia looked at Oliver, who nodded slightly. "I'll call the medical team," he said, leaving the room. In the hours that followed, a series of tests were performed. Richard, despite his weakened condition, insisted on doing all the necessary procedures. When they finally finished, he was exhausted, but his eyes had a different glimmer. "Amelia," he called as she prepared to leave, "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but can I see her, just once?" Before she could answer, her cell phone rang. It was from the hospital. Lily had had another crisis. "We have to go," said Oliver, already grabbing the car keys. "Wait," Richard called again. "Take this." He held out the envelope with the photos. "She deserves to know, deserves to understand." Amelia took the envelope mechanically, her mind already at the hospital with her daughter. The drive back was a blur. When they arrived at Lily's room, they found the girl awake, paler than ever, but smiling faintly. "Where were you?" she asked. "I missed you." Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, holding her daughter's small, warm hand. "We went to take care of some important things, my love. Things that will help you get better." Lily looked at the envelope Amelia was still holding. "What's that?" Amelia exchanged a look with Oliver before answering. They're pictures of you, honey, from when you were little." "Can I see?" With trembling hands, Amelia opened the envelope. Together, mother and daughter looked at the photos, Amelia explaining each captured moment, each preserved memory, while Oliver watched in silence. "Who took these pictures?" Lily asked finally. "I don't remember some of them." It was your biological father," Amelia replied, the words coming out with difficulty. Lily was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Is he sick like me?" she asked surprisingly. "How do you know?" "Because of the dream," she replied simply. "He was in a hospital room, apologizing." Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. How could Lily know? "It doesn't matter," the girl continued, her voice tired but serene. "I have you two now. You and Oliver are my real family." At that moment, Dr. Peterson entered the room, his face lit by a smile they hadn't seen in a long time. "Mr. Miller's results just came in," he announced. "He's compatible." The news hit Amelia like a wave. Tears began to fall from her eyes as she hugged Lily. "But," continued the doctor, his smile dimming slightly, "due to his condition, the procedure will be very risky for both of them." "What procedure?" Lily asked, looking curiously between the adults. "Your biological father," Oliver explained, gently, "wants to donate something very special to you, something that can make you better." "Even though he's sick too?" "Yes, even then." Lily was silent for a moment, her eyes showing a wisdom beyond her years. "He wants to do this because he's sorry," she asked. "For leaving?" "Yes, my love," replied Amelia, the tears still flowing. "He wants to try to make things right." "Then," said Lily, squeezing Oliver's hand, "maybe I should let him try, like you did with Mom." The comment took everyone by surprise. Oliver looked at Amelia, his eyes also welling up. "Your daughter is wiser than all of us combined," he said softly. In the days that followed, the preparations for the transplant were made. Richard was transferred to the same hospital, and despite the risks, he insisted on going ahead with the procedure. On the eve of the surgery, he asked to see Lily. After much discussion, Amelia agreed, but with one condition. She and Oliver would be present. The meeting was brief, emotional, and painful. Richard, in his wheelchair, wept as he saw his daughter for the first time. Lily, with her childlike simplicity, just held his hand and said, Thank you for wanting to help me. The transplant was performed the next morning. There were hours of anguish and waiting, with Amelia and Oliver in the hallway, their hands intertwined, praying silently. Richard did not survive the procedure. His body, already too weakened, couldn't resist. But his last act was to give the daughter he never truly knew a chance at life. 3 months later, Lily was discharged from the hospital. Richard's marrow had been accepted by her body, and gradually she regained her strength. Her hair began to grow back, and her smile returned to brighten the days. On a sunny afternoon, Amelia watched through the window as Oliver pushed Lily on a swing in the garden of their new house, the first they had bought together. On the walls of the living room, among photos of happy moments of the three of them, was framed one of Lily's drawings. 3 people holding hands, her heart family. Fate, that tireless player, had finally shown all its cards. And in the end, through pain and forgiveness, through love and redemption, it had woven a story of hope. A story that proved that family is not just a matter of blood, but of choices, of love, and of second chances. Lily was healed. And with her, somehow, everyone else had healed too, from the hurts of the past, from fears, from guilts. Richard had departed finding redemption. Charles had learned a lesson about courage and honesty, and Amelia had found not only love, but also the capacity to forgive. "Mom," Lily's voice brought her back to the present. "Come play with us." Amelia smiled and went out to the garden, joining her family. Her real family, built not by destiny or by blood, but by the love they had chosen to give each other every day, even in the most difficult moments. And so, under the afternoon sun, their laughter mingled with the wind, proving that after the storm, after the pain and suffering, there is always the possibility of starting over, of building something new, something better, of finding happiness in the most unexpected places and in the people that fate puts in our path.